The CRTC wants to know how radio, TV, and digital platforms in Canada can best meet the needs of Indigenous viewers, listeners, and content creators. Join the conversation today at crtc.gc.ca/indigenous-broadcasting.
A message from the Government of Canada.
Le CRTC veut savoir comment la radio, la télévision et les plateformes numériques au Canada peuvent mieux répondre aux besoins des spectateurs, auditeurs et créateurs de contenu autochtones. Joignez-vous à la conversation aujourd'hui au crtc.gc.ca/radiodiffusion-autochtone.
Un message du gouvernement du Canada.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta says the Manitoba Métis Federation needs to stop practicing divisive politics.
The Otipemisiwak Métis government is disappointed in the repeated attempts by the Manitoba Métis Federation to divide the Métis Nation.
APTN reporter Kathleen Martin says Jeremy Skibicki's murder trial is further proof the search of a Winnipeg landfill needs to happen sooner than later.
If the families don't hear something almost immediately after the trial, they'll be very upset.
A Yellowknife doctor says exposure to wildfires can have a number of mental health effects.
So it can really increase levels of eco-anxiety and ecological grief, which we're increasingly understanding are normal reactions.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. Our Indigenous Identity Fraud Summit is taking place in Winnipeg this week, co-hosted by the Manitoba Métis Federation and Chiefs of Ontario. Summit takes direct aim at organizations like the Métis Nation of Ontario, who both the MMF and COO accuse of not being a legitimate organization representing Métis people. But others say the summit is only sowing division and harm against Indigenous people. This includes the Otipemisiwak Métis government, formerly known as the Métis Nation of Alberta, which was not invited to the summit. The organization's president, Andrea Sandmeyer, joins me today from Edmonton. Welcome to Nation, President Sandmeyer.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me today.
So I'll start off, I guess, with the press release that your organization sent out about this summit, which clearly says that no external body can speak for your organization. Can you maybe just expand a little bit upon that?
Yeah, so, here in Alberta, we are, the oldest Métis Nation government in the homeland. And we are very proud Métis citizens here in Alberta. Last year, we ratified or had an election under our new constitution that was ratified in 2022. And we are very proud of that. And we are, our government is Otipemisiwak Métis government, formerly known as the Métis Nation of Alberta. Otipemisiwak means to govern ourselves. And that is what we do here in Alberta and have done for many, many years. And we intend to continue doing that. No other Métis government will speak for the Métis Nation within Alberta for the Otipemisiwak Métis government.
Now, as noted in the introduction, the OMG was not invited to the summit. Hopefully it's okay if I call you OMG. But if you were invited, what would you say to those in attendance?
Well, the whole idea of identity fraud is very concerning for all Indigenous people. Unfortunately, there are people out there that are taking advantage of many things, including, getting prestigious positions within post-secondary or in industry, and sadly, even taking funding by posing as Indigenous people. So these things are all very concerning for us as well. We here in the Métis Nation within Alberta, we are, very proud of the registry that we have. Our registry here is top notch. It is objectively verifiable. We connect to the Métis homeland. We have a process in place that's very strict. And have had external audits. And, we're very proud of the fact that people could come in and look at any file of a citizen here. Obviously, under privacy law, we wouldn't be able to do that, but you could do that and see how they connect to the Métis Nation homeland.
Now,
So,
go ahead,
we
sorry.
are concerned about identity fraud, and, we need to be working with industry, with post-secondary, to make sure that they have the proper things in place to verify when people come and say, I'm Indigenous, can I have a job? Or I'm Indigenous, can I have a scholarship? There has to be something in place.
Oh, I was just going to move to, we've been getting also, talked a little bit about in the introduction as well, about some of the division and pain some of these accusations are causing and what the summit's doing. And I've seen a lot of that actually coming across. I just saw Tony Belcourt here in Ontario posted something about, people are feeling very stressed out about this, losing sleep or that. What are the what have you heard, I guess, or seen in Alberta about what this maybe is causing some people?
Yeah, this year has been particularly challenging for our citizens. False statements have been made about Métis communities. Media stories have given a platform to those who are questioning the rights and existence of Métis people. And it is impacting mental health, safety, physical well-being of Métis people of all ages. Just imagine how a young Métis person feels when they, read a press release or see in social media the comments that are made in social media about their people, their community, their culture not existing. It is so hurtful and dehumanizing, harmful, and completely false. Um, the comments aren't based on fact or historical data or even Canadian law. And we've been receiving messages from citizens, you know, that have youth, that have kids in school, that other kids are saying things. It's really hurtful, really hard on mental health.
And I guess this is the latest chapter, I suppose, in what's been going on for a few years now. It started with the MMF leaving the Métis National Council because of the inclusion of the Métis Nation of Ontario. There's been a lot of talk back and forth. I guess at this point, what do you think the way forward is to sort of maybe bring all Métis people back together?
That is a really good question, and I wish I had a really easy answer for that, Fraser. Um, the Otipemisiwak Métis government is disappointed in the repeated attempts by the Manitoba Métis Federation to divide the Métis Nation. We're all related, to be fighting amongst each other it's, as I said earlier, harmful to our citizens. We need to come together and work together the way that we were intended to do. How that happens is a very good question.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the $1 million question, I suppose, these days. And
Most definitely.
It's not the first dispute, of course, even before this, that's happened within individual Métis governments, things like that. So it has been a problem in the past. I guess I thought I might move now to a recent court decision I'm sure you're familiar with, and it has to do with the drafting of Bill C-53, and that this court decision found that not all Métis groups in Alberta had been consulted before the legislation was drafted. I was just wondering, this is a fairly recent court decision, but I just wondering maybe if you could give us a little bit of an update, maybe what has been happening since then in Alberta with the different Métis groups.
All right, so I just want to make it clear that the recent judicial review was with regards to our self-government agreement and not the legislation. And with the legislation, when it went through the INAM process and we did all of these amendments, it's very clear in the legislation that the Otipemisiwak Métis government is representing our citizens, people that hold citizenship cards. In the legislation, the judge felt in the legislation that that wasn't clear, and we have said to Canada, amend it, fix it. because we know who we represent, and that are citizens of the Métis Nation of Alberta, citizens of now the Otukimsoak Métis government. Our agreement with Canada is legally binding.
Right, and I guess yeah, I guess we'll have to see what, and it's really, as you say, I suppose it's really the federal government to, I mean, you can be part of the consultations, but it's their duty to consult.
That's correct.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have, but really appreciate you sitting down today. I know you're busy to talk to us about some of these various issues, and congratulations on your presidency, because I know you were recently elected, and very nice to talk to you again.
Thank you, Fraser.
After the break, we'll talk to APTN reporter Kathleen Martins, who's covering the trial of Jeremy Skibicki, the man charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of 4 Indigenous women in Winnipeg.
Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.
Welcome back. The first-degree murder trial of Jeremy Skibicki is taking place this week in Winnipeg. He's the 37-year-old man charged in the deaths of 4 Indigenous women, Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and a 4th identified female known as Buffalo Woman. Skibicki has confessed to the killings, but the defense is pleading not guilty, claiming he is not criminally responsible due to mental illness. APTN's Kathleen Martins has been covering the trial, and she joins us today from our Winnipeg studio. Welcome back to Nation to Nation, Kathleen.
Thanks, Fraser. It's good to be here.
So I guess I thought I would start with, we understand the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick has been at the trial this week. Did she have anything to say to media?
No, they've all been very careful not to say anything because the trial is ongoing. And of course, nobody wants to jeopardize the outcome of this trial. So much is riding on it. So she was visible. She sat in the front row with members of the family of Morgan Harris. Merrick was the lead on the study, the feasibility study into searching the Prairie Green landfill, where police believe the bodies of Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman were dumped as part of a regular garbage collection.
Right, yeah, and I understand she has, as you say, spoken, taken a lead role in this file and then spoken in the past, so keeping quiet, I guess, right now during the trial. But I guess I'd move to the police now, of course, say the remains of the 4 victims are located in the 2 Winnipeg area landfills. Has a search of these landfills been discussed at the trial?
No, it hasn't. I know that, again, people want him convicted, right? Families of the victims want to see him convicted. And then the next step will be the landfill searches, and they're waiting. No date, no official announcement from the federal or provincial governments has been made yet. There hasn't been any search information released since Kathy Merrick's AMC came out with a feasibility study.
Now, with that, I have asked that question a number of times to the people involved here, Leah Gazan and the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Gary Anderson, and they've been pretty vague as well on when this might start, although the money has been committed on both sides, $20 million each. Do you think we might see some movement on that after the trial? Because it is getting quite some time since we're going on a couple of years now since the initial search was called for.
I think if the families don't hear something almost immediately after the trial, they'll be very upset, and we could see some more protests, even potential unrest this summer. The judge is going to reserve, right? He's not going to hear 6 weeks of testimony and then make a decision. The judge will reserve his decision, but that doesn't mean that a landfill search can't be announced. There's a lot that has to be done to organize it, right? They need special equipment, clothing, They've got to get a lot of stuff together, everybody involved. They want to hire people. According to the feasibility study, they need almost 100 people to help put this together, the forensic investigators, the anthropologists. And it's going to cost, millions of dollars, as we know, but having this silence hanging over the trial is understandable for now, but right after the trial, no. I think people, the public and families in particular, they want to hear some news about when the search is going to begin.
I think you're right. Yeah, there's definitely going to be some pressure, and I think everyone's been quite kind of careful not to say much, but how much longer they can hold off now the money has been committed is, I don't think you're right, it can be too much longer. Now this course, as you know, we've been covering this issue over the last couple of years. It plays right into the ongoing issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. What about the 231 calls to justice that are contained in the final report of that national inquiry? Where do you think that they fit into this trial?
Well, if I was going to put together a documentary for a streaming service, it would be like this. Everything we're hearing at the trial illustrates what we heard during the inquiry testimony and what those calls to action address when it comes to the crisis of MMIWG and ways to try to close the gaps between reporting and who's on the street, building a database, how to search immediately, just all of those elements. And as we all know, police agencies, municipalities, governments, they all have a role to play. They were all asked to implement some of these 231 calls to justice, and we know very few, a handful only, have been implemented. But so much of what we're hearing illustrates exactly what those calls to action were designed to address.
So that brings me to, of course, in a way that already Skibicki has confessed, and he is, whether he's found criminally responsible or not because of this, mental illness he has, he is a serial killer. And I think this has taken such, everyone's been talking about these cases for, years now, and it's probably the biggest case since another one, of course, that we all remember was the trial of convicted serial killer Robert Pickton. Now, do you see parallels between the two cases?
Absolutely. At least 2 of these 4 victims were reported missing to police. They were missing before it was confirmed they were murdered. I don't know the kind of reception they received from police, but that's check, right? That's one of the things that the families of the Pickton victims went through. And they also talked about how there wasn't really a search for the missing women. That's the same here. They were reported missing, but nobody other than Bear Clan Patrol here, as part of its nightly or looks around, walks around the city. There isn't police don't go out and automatically start searching for these women. Also, serial killers like Pickton and Skibicki now, they hunt in areas where they know they're unlikely to get caught. And it is a sad commentary that still you can victimize, exploit, murder Indigenous women and get away with it. Skibicki said he never thought he would get caught. And Pickton was able to operate unimpeded for years before police even admitted there might be a serial killer. For the longest time, the Vancouver police said the women just had disappeared. I think one family was told their loved one went on a cruise, and they were told, that they were partying, or as soon as their check was ready, they would be back. It was incredibly dismissive and insulting and offensive for those families.
Yeah, it certainly makes you wonder if we learned anything from what we're supposed to learn from the Pickton trial all these years ago, with many of the, as you say, parallels being kind of repeated over again here. But unfortunately, we'll have to end it there for time. But thanks very much for covering this trial for APTN and joining us today, Kathleen.
Thanks for having me, Fraser.
Next up, we'll talk to Courtney Howard, an emergency room physician in Yellowknife who researches the health effects of wildfires.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News. Homeless, houseless, shelterless people, they aren't hard to find in Winnipeg. They're on the sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they? Hear their stories in my new 5-part podcast called Our Relatives. Listen on your favorite player.
Welcome back. Last year was a record-breaking wildfire season in Canada as fires raged from coast to coast. Once again, provinces and territories are preparing for another heavy fire season this summer, and experts say because of climate change, this could be the new norm. Indigenous people living in remote northern communities are often those most affected by these fires. Courtney Howard is an emergency room doctor in Yellowknife who has experienced wildfires firsthand, and she also researches the health effects fires have on communities. Dr. Howard joins us today from Yellowknife. Welcome to Nation to Nation, Dr. Howard.
Thanks for having me.
I guess I thought I might first ask you what I know there's some fires around Yellowknife this year again. Can you just give us a little bit of an update on what the fire situation is as we speak?
Sure. So we've had some smoke in the air. Yesterday was a little bit smoky. Today it looks like we've got clear skies. There was a point last week when both of the highways that connect us to the south were both blocked, and Fort Simpson lost its cell coverage. So this has had some consequences for our ability to dial 911 reliably. So far, certainly not as affected as we were last year, but indications that some of our systems have been disrupted and we need to be thinking about how we can build resilience for the future.
Right, so it sounds like it, you're just waiting to see how it, hopefully it's not as bad as last year, but who knows these days, right, with climate change and whatnot. Now I guess obviously you study the health effects, and that would be both physical and mental of these fires. What are some of the things you can tell us about both the long and short-term effects that wildfires have on the health of people?
Sure. So this is multi-layered. For people who evacuate out of places that are seriously endangered by fire, of course, there's always the danger of actual trauma, whether it's burn, or we often see automobile accidents as people are leaving quickly and under difficult circumstances. People often end up with post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. They can last for a year or more after that type of an evacuation, lingering anxiety, sometimes depression, substance abuse disorders. Youth can be particularly highly affected because, of course, sometimes they don't entirely understand what's going on and feel even less in control of the situation than adults do. From a bigger distance, we tend to be more affected by smoke. And so wildfire smoke is increasingly understood to actually increase overall mortality. So it's quite bad for us. The tiniest parts of the particles can penetrate not only all the way down into our lungs, but into our bloodstream as well. So they lead to an inflammatory cascade. So we see effects not only in the lungs, but also in the heart. We now understand that we have increased levels of heart attacks during wildfire smoke episodes. So if people feel tight in their chest, don't just attribute that to asthma or to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Go get checked out. We need to make sure that that's not your heart. Certainly people with asthma tend to need more of their breathing medicines. We see lots more people coming to the emergency department for help. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease also tends to get worse. For those of us who don't have pre-existing vulnerabilities, or if the smoke isn't that bad, we still tend to have a low-grade headache, itchy, watery eyes. And then when we take a look at the mental health impacts, we're just starting to get a sense of the mental health impacts of smoke, but most of the studies show almost a seasonal affective disorder type of effect from that change in the light that we're getting from the sun. It tends to be duller, a different color. People tend to be a bit low energy, irritable, have some trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, and all of that is totally normal.
Of course, as I mentioned in the intro, a lot of these fires involve directly Indigenous communities. And of course, that falls under the federal government. So the federal government has looked at some things to help prepare these communities better. I think they're providing money so that they're not left out with, covering the costs up front, which can be very costly dealing with wildfires, of course. But what are some of the things that you think that the federal government could do to better assist these Indigenous communities as they deal with heavy fire seasons? It seems as a regular thing now.
As part of the Northwest Territories Medical Association right now, we're having a lot of discussions around clean air shelters. We know that housing is not as good as in the rest of Canada in many Indigenous communities, and that's a problem because the public health advice for wildfire smoke episodes is to stay inside with the windows closed. But of course, that's only going to work as well as your building envelope and your ventilation system. And so what we're really asking for increased investment in is buildings themselves. And when we did our study, actually, and I reviewed it with the chief of the Yellowknives Dene, this was his real major ask, was that we take a look at building envelopes. We make sure that particularly for key community structures, schools, health centers, band offices, anywhere where people can gather, that we have the infrastructure we need to maintain a reasonable indoor air quality. So what should be installed are both indoor and outdoor air quality sensors, so we can see whether or not we're managing to keep the indoor air quality better than the outdoor air quality. And if we're not, we should be aiming inside the buildings for an indoor air quality of less than 30 in terms of particulate matter that's of a diameter of less than 2.5 microns, because those are the tiny little particles that can go all the way into our lungs and cross into our bloodstream. So we want that to be under 30 ideally. And for most of our buildings, that's going to require, in many cases, yesterday we actually had someone in to take a look at our windows because some of our windows were leaky. So taking a look at the actual physical structures, taking a look at your HVAC system, and installing additional air filtration capacity as necessary as you monitor the indoor air quality if it's not doing the job with what you got.
Okay, well, unfortunately for time purposes, I'll have to end it there, but thanks again very much for talking to us anyway. It's an important issue that you're studying, and I guess I want to say stay safe as well, because obviously fires are affecting the area in this spring and summer.
Yeah, sending energy to everyone out there, and stay safe, stay healthy, take care of one another. I know you will.
That concludes this week's episode of Nation to Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.
APTN presents a captivating journey into the heart of the North with our latest podcast, The Place That Thaws.
Some areas that used to be safe are no longer safe.
Hosted by me, Danielle Parody. Join us as we uncover the intricacies of life on a changing coast. Subscribe and listen to The Place That Thaws.